Hey, good evening everyone. I had mentioned in our introductory video that I wanted to put some emphasis on our use of cover crops and no-till, and the fact that we're trying to adopt some principles related to regenerative or sustainable agriculture. In order to get you guys up to speed for harvest time this fall, I thought I'd take a minute and talk a bit about how we got to the point we're at right now. So I know the first couple of videos are a lot of dialogue and not much action, but I think it's right to give you guys the background so that you're not totally lost when we start harvesting and planting cover crops after the soybeans and so on. So right now it's September of 2019, and all of this started in the summer of 2018. I had been doing some reading. We'd read some books by David Montgomery, and I had been watching some YouTube videos, particularly by Gabe Brown, who's been doing some of these cover crop and regenerative practices for years now, and is if anyone's got expertise on it, it's him. And there's a whole host of others. Ray Archuleta has done a lot of speaking about it. I'm taking a class right now online with the Soil Food Web, which is Elaine Ingham, Dr. Christine Nichols. These are all kind of good resources to turn to if you're interested in learning about implementation of regenerative agriculture, planting cover crops. They won't give you a how-to book, but they'll give you the theory behind it and some of the science, depending on who you're actually paying attention to. Along with that, for a few years, my wife and I have been members of the Land Stewardship Project here in Minnesota and the Sustainable Farming Association, and they also are instrumental in helping farmers look at certain things progressively, making sure that their methods are sound and being able to question why they're doing what they're doing. So with that in mind, I talked to my dad, and he's always been a traditionalist. He enjoyed plowing his fields and working his land, and I didn't expect him to go in on it. And I was pleasantly surprised that he not only was interested, but willing to go ahead with it right away. So one of the first things we did, along with using some of these other online resources and books and the people who I've already mentioned, we went and visited our local county soil and water, our soil and water conservation district, and talked to the staff members there. And they have some good expertise. They already knew farmers in our county who were starting to employ some of these methods, and they had a cost-sharing program for starting cover crops. So we committed to a 3-year contract for implementing cover crops on our farm. And the way we wanted to do that, for us specifically with corn and soybeans, is to follow our soybean harvest with a cover crop so that we would have something that would overwinter and come back in the spring. I specifically wanted a diverse mix of cover crops because I think the monoculture cropping that we've been doing is not great for the environment on a lot of different levels. When you don't have the plant diversity, you don't have the insect diversity and the microbe diversity, and all of those things work together. So we really wanted to diversify our species on this farm, even if it's just a little bit. So we committed to that 3-year contract where they would help us pick up the cost for some of that seed and application. And we got started. I misspoke earlier, and I got the timeline mixed up. We started thinking about cover crops and no-till in the early spring of 2018, January or February. And so the way the timeline works out is that we had tilled in the fall of 2017, which is we had moldboard plowed our corn stalks and we chisel plowed our bean ground, and that's the way we'd been doing it for years. So then in the spring of 2018, we planted like we normally would have, with the idea that we were then going to modify an old John Deere 8300 grain drill by taking some of the coulters off, and we would use that to interseed a cover crop mix into our corn crop. And then that's when we got involved with the Soil and Water Conservation District and planned a lot of that out. We got all our crops planted in the spring. The goal was to interseed in June at about the V5 to V7 stage in the corn. And we had a delay. We didn't get our seed figured out in time. We didn't realize how much time we needed to plan for the cover crops and to get in with a seed dealer and get those ordered. So we were a little late on the draw. We couldn't get the seed in time, and then it started raining. And it rained consistently for a large chunk of the month that we wanted to plant those, that we wanted to interseed those covers into the corn. At that point, we couldn't get in anymore. Once the fields finally dried out, the corn was too big for us to go in with a grain drill. We would have been knocking down the plants, and it wouldn't have worked well. And so I tried to contact some aerial seeding services, either helicopter or airplane, to try to get those covers put on our corn. But we only had 34 acres of corn, so nobody would bother with us. We weren't big enough to do that. As luck would have it, again, working with the Soil and Water Conservation District, they got us into a program where we had an aerial application service that would do several farms at once if we all put the same mix of covers on. So it was 5 or 6 farms that had this done, and ours was one of them. So we actually did get the corn interseeded, but it wasn't until September. And that aerial seeding service came in and seeded the cover crop mix of cereal rye, radishes, and turnips into our standing corn crop and into our standing soybean crop at that time. All of our land was covered with the same seed mix. It was a kind of an early fall, so the radishes and turnips didn't develop very well, but the cereal rye did get started. I think we lost a lot of it into the whorls of the corn plants, and a lot of the seed never hit the ground, and then that which didn't germinate very well. And then of course the radishes and turnips died off with the frost, which came fairly early that year. And the next spring the cereal rye came up in all the fields. So that brings us to this year, spring of 2019. And our goal was to go in, modify our corn planter to be able to be a no-till planter, because we had never used it as a no-till planter before that. So we added down pressure springs to it, and we added fertilizer openers to the front of it. It had some, we had taken them off, so we put different ones on. And our goal was to put dry fertilizer in a band and to use those down pressure springs to get through the soybean residue. And to plant green. Since we weren't tilling, we let the cereal rye come up and get established. And to be fair, we didn't really have a choice with this, because the spring was really nasty here. It was rainy and cold, and the ground was wet, and we had to wait and wait before we could finally get in the field. And so it just made sense to go in and plant green into the standing cereal rye crop there without terminating it first. I should add, we bought a no-till soybean drill as well. It's not really a soybean drill, but we bought a conservation drill that was made by Truax. And it was for sale on Craigslist. It was a reasonable price, and being a small farm, price is always a concern with us. So we bought it knowing we were handy enough that we could probably make it work even if it wasn't quite right for our situation, and it has proven to be a pretty good piece of equipment. So anyway, spring of this year, we go into the fields, and we planted our soybeans first, which was a little out of order, but our soybean ground was drier than our corn ground, so we had to do that first. And then we waited, and finally in the first week of June, it was about our last opportunity to plant corn. We went in and planted our corn crop. And for us on a small farm, it took us about 3 days to plant the beans, and it only took that long because it rained. We planted half of them and got rain and had to wait. And then when we got around to the corn, we did that in about 2 days for the corn acreage that we had this year. And that's using just a John Deere 7000 4-row planter. So then, at this point, we're getting close to where we're at now timeline-wise. We were able this year to take that 8300 grain drill, the John Deere standard grain drill, and get in and interseed our corn crop. We did a mix of annual ryegrass, bayou kale, crimson clover, and I believe a tillage radish. I think that's correct. So we got that in at about the V2 to V3 stage. The corn was about this tall, and they what we've understood lately is that they're saying go in earlier than they would have advocated in the past. So we wanted to get in and get that done as quick as we could. I should also add that before we interseeded, we sprayed down any weeds in the fields. So we gave everything a quick hit in the cornfields with Roundup and 2,4-D, knocked out our weeds, and then interseeded shortly after that. And that all worked really well, and that kind of brings us up to the present here. So at this point we have soybeans we need to harvest, and this fall we'll follow them with a cover crop mix. And our corn is currently growing and maturing with cover crops interseeded in between the corn rows. And when we harvest the corn, those will be left behind and they will freeze off during the winter months, and we should have a lot of nice residue to plant into with our soybean rotation that will follow that corn next spring. That gets you up to the present. I hope I can edit this in a way that makes it actually make sense, because I got a little rambly, but that was the point, to get you up to speed on that.